Tuesdays is Nathan Buckley, though, at the start. Hello to you, Bucks.
G'day, Gerard. How are you?
I'm very well. You?
Yeah, I'm very well. There's always a bit happening around the AFL environment in particular, but I'm really excited for the year. I think it proves to be a really competitive season, and already, we've got stories galore.
We've got a bit of big picture today around
Yes.
game styles and change and the coaching tension and all of that. But so the news of the day first. Will North Melbourne be better off without Tarryn Thomas? Is that about to finish its course?
I think I'll preface any comments by saying that I think it's our style, it's the media's style to get ahead of things before, and so clubs always look like they're behind what the media might speculate about. But North would be very aware of the next steps and what they need to do. I think they've shown great pastoral care for their people, and Tarryn being one of those people. And what I would say about an internal club environment is you are 100% behind and for and with the people in your environment until you're not. So I don't know where North are at in that spectrum, but where there's smoke, there's fire. And if an individual simply will not or cannot come along with the journey of the rest of the organisation, or the organisation can't sit and wait for someone to join in. So this may be one of those nexus situations where North need to move on and allow Tarryn to take responsibility for his actions and hopefully make the according behavioural changes to make the most of whatever he's got in front of him.
What's the talent trouble equation look like inside the four walls?
I think the appetite to absorb the trouble is less and less. I think that it should be, because I think the competition for spots is as fierce. I'm talking about spots on lists, is as fierce as it's ever been. And the responsibility of each individual to buy into what the club is doing both on and off the field is so important. It's so pivotal to success in the end. So if you have someone that's not rowing in the same direction, it doesn't matter how talented that player is. And we'll have different. I mean, you throw a couple of names at me that you think are a talent trouble equation. Stringer and De Goey are a couple that I would have thought have been there in the past. Who else have we got? Toby Green has now proven that the talent and his application to his craft and to the club has overcome any of the trouble that we saw in the past.
Yeah. So you would have had. So I don't want to bucket everybody in together because there are different levels of off-field trouble, right?
But we love the bucket, don't we?
So let's find the nuance in it.
Yep.
But so for a period of time, Jaden Stevenson would have looked like that for me in your environment. You go, okay, so how much effort goes into one player versus the rest of the locker room, and does that wear out over a period of time, and does that ultimately not a sort of a pinnacle moment of trouble, but does that ultimately see a player tip out, the accumulation of it?
Well, Jaden's specific situation, and it's he's currently in the midst of his football career, and he's a talented young player that still has areas of his game to improve on field. And I don't know, I haven't been in touch with him in the last couple of years. I don't know how he's going off field, whether his professionalism has improved. But Jaden was no issue at all through 2018. He came in as a young player. He worked hard. He put his head down. And really halfway through 19, it didn't look like anything was amiss. Like he was just a young kid who was trying to work it out and how he fit in. And for the most part, it was really positive. He had a conversation with a teammate, a leader at the time, about what he'd done from a gambling situation, and that was a heads up. Self-reported to the club, self-reported to the AFL, ends up with the 10-week suspension. So that was a one-off at that stage, and COVID hit soon after, and we had to make the call on him at the end of 2020. That wasn't all behavioural. There was some, obviously there was some pressures from salary cap, and we wondered whether he was going to be able to make the gaps in his game on field. So there was a few things. It wasn't all a behavioural issue, but at the end of 2019, it was sincerely a one-off, and we supported him as much as we possibly could because he he made a thoughtless decision. We didn't know if it was. We had no evidence to assume that it was ongoing and more than just a one-off, and we supported him as such.
I suspect Jack Ginnivan's not at Collingwood anymore on a form of this equation.
Could be.
He took a lot of individual attention, and his payoff on the field could be replaced and maybe bettered by somebody else. And
they're not footy decisions.
No, and that's a very harmless version of this, but I suspect it's a version of it. Is if he was in their best 10 players, I suspect they would have been able to sort of absorb some of the attention and the fact that he didn't help himself at various times. But I reckon he was expendable to them.
Often one will follow the other. If you are cutting corners and you are taking liberties in your off-field preparation, and therefore your ultimate, best endeavours to be prepared for whatever you need to do on field, I think that will generally come out in the wash. I wasn't there for the last couple of years with Jack. I know that there is a very strong leadership group at Collingwood, and they do have a very strong opinion on and high standards on an expectation of professionalism and how they want each other to present and what they want each other to invest for the cause. So it's not just the coaches, it's the locker room as well, about the satisfaction around individuals. And I think some clubs listen to their locker room more than others, and they should at times if they've got strong leadership and leaders who walk the walk. Potentially you're not going to be listening to your locker room as much if the leadership isn't as strong or isn't as developed at that point.
I think the Clayton Oliver scenario clearly falls into this category. Liberties were given, liberties were taken, and then the halt was put to that. And my point around the Oliver scenario is it doesn't actually matter what it looks like to us, is they know in the locker room exactly what's been going on. They're living it, and they end up accountable to it. So the most dedicated end up answering for someone who's not quite living those standards. But Oliver is such a great player and he's on such a contract that he is worth the effort.
Yeah, and
that effort is playing out before us right now, I think.
I mean, I find it very difficult as a logical thinker and there's no doubt that this, when it came to the surface for us and even for the guys at Melbourne, there would have been some form of coping with whatever he was doing to cope and the pressure that he might have felt to be a consistent high performer. Those behaviours would have been festering and developing over, I don't know, a couple of years. Like, that's logical. Now, it might not have. It might have been a one-off thing, and then it sort of goes. Then it's sort of the Band-Aid gets ripped off. But you have to assume that there's probably been issues bubbling along, but his consistent elite performance has just kept that under the surface. And maybe you sweep some of that stuff under the carpet whilst that's happening, whilst someone looks like they're coping. But as soon as it's quite obvious that they're not coping, whatever those issues are, whether they're personal, whether they're emotional, whether they're poor choices, then it becomes it's nearly a moment. I'm trying to think of the word where you basically you sit down and you have this is a come to Jesus moment. You're either with us or not. We're here for you as a person first, and then a footballer second, and we want to help you. And it's an intervention. That's the word, intervention. And you're just saying, well, we need to be here for you, and you cannot continue making these decisions or putting yourself under this stress, and now it's starting to affect the club. But we care for you. So I think that's what clubs do, and in that sense, they're ahead of what the media see, feel, and believe.
Yeah. So we wait to see what the AFL action is. Tom Morris with the report that it's going to be an 18-match suspension. So that in itself will give an insight into the gravity. Is that sort of suspension for off-field issues? It's hard to come up with a precedent. Is Ben Cousins got banned indefinitely for a period of time? Gambling was 10 weeks. I think the gravity of what's taking place around the investigation and the habitual behaviour if that 18-match suspension is announced by the AFL, then that'll give you a pretty good idea. And I am quite firm. The game can't be a haven for recidivists. There has to be a point where the game goes, okay, we're not callously tossing you back into the community, and a lot has been done on that front, but we can't have you as part of this community for the time being.
And I think the AFL have, I think Andrew Demetrio set this precedent. He wanted our sport to be front and centre in societal issues. And that's difficult when you're dealing with young teenage men who are still working themselves out, let alone how they fit in the football environment and then in society. So you're putting players on a pedestal, young men on a pedestal that potentially aren't the arbiters of how to live your life the best way. But it's important the AFL have followed through and become the umpires of what they think is societal norms and hold. And I think we should be held to a higher standard because we're in a very public situation. But the AFL have followed through with that more often than not. I think clubs are very good at it, but quite often they will want to suppress and support internally before having these things come out in public. They're not as open as the AFL would be. I would have thought, but it's definitely changed. The AFL are taking more of a hands-on approach to these integrity issues and societal issues over clubs than they ever have before.
Yeah. So just a snapshot of those who have been on the station across the past week, the idea of marginal gains and change, and then what you've really been specific about is that's very honed from Chris Fagan around identifying what didn't quite work again, or what Collingwood was superior about, and then investing time in that. So there's the minutiae of it, Nathan Buckley, and then there's the big picture of game style and where you fit, what you've chosen and what you're about to roll out. So let's have the big picture conversation around game style.
Okay, where do we start?
Evolution.
I think I've gone back about 20 years to look at the premiers of the time and to look at where the game may have come from and evolved. So, and I only wanted to go back to 2010, but then I went back to you had to include Geelong's era, and then I wanted to go back even earlier than that for the Swans and West Coast grand finals because they were just the toughest, fittest teams of the era. Like both of them were coached. Paul Roos and John Worsfold coached them to be tough inside and fit to get to the next contest, and that's pretty much those grand finals. That's the way they were played, and they just bullied other teams with the way that they were able to win those contests more often than not. Then Bomber had Geelong going with really solid intercept defence, gun mids, and that run and carry attitude that we want to score as heavily as we possibly can. The way that was countered was come forward defence. So St Kilda and Collingwood had eras there where their defence was designed and drawn to put pressure on the ball and stop that run and carry. So Collingwood had that success over St Kilda in 2010. Chris Scott comes in and he evolves Geelong's because Collingwood had that really significant preliminary final win in 2010 against Geelong, and that was a shock. Chris Scott comes in, he says, all right, well, if you're going to press us that hard, we're going to kick over you. And so Geelong changed slightly with Chris Scott. He doesn't probably get enough credit for that little shift that he made, and they kicked longer. So Tom Hawkins became more important. They kicked over the pressure initially and then played the old style from that. But that was still a small shift, but a significant shift. Won him a flag. Swans were great. Best contested team in 2012. Work rate from contest to contest. Again, that's the Swans way. It's always been hardest and cleanest inside and get numbers to the next contest, and they've done that extremely well. And then the Hawks went on their era, more possession-based from the back half. We sort of started seeing the quarterback idea, Hodge, Birchall, etc., the left footers off half-back, move the ball in a manner that we can defend. So they're always thinking about defending, but we want to make sure that we control the ball. We move the opposition around till we find a hole, and then we go use it. And if we need to go forward under pressure, we go forward to the ground because we've got Rioli, we've got Bruce, we've got Puopolo, we've got Gunston. So they play, and then Franklin was a smaller, tall forward. So we've got to 2015 now. 2016 was just one out of the box with the Bulldogs. They just got so good in close, and their pressure on the opposition was huge. Then the Richmond era, take the contest forward of the play. You know, we want to make sure that when the ball hits the ground on the deck, we're making the defences. We need to get it to the deck first, and so we've got a Castagna. We've got small forwards that actually are really good aerially. They don't take a lot of marks, but they just bring the ball to ground, and then we just hunt them, and then we just force them into pressure, and we score off the back of that. That's how they won their flags. In between that, 2018, West Coast and Collingwood, that was a bit of a throwback about the possession game in the half, and obviously when we knocked Richmond over in the prelim, that broke the nexus a little bit, but Richmond's game style was still strong to continue. But West Coast and us went about it a similar way. Control the ball in the back half, try and split the defence, pull them apart, and then score off that. Melbourne were just a solid back six, dominant mids, and scored heavily. Like that grand final was one out of the box. But Melbourne probably learnt not to put as many people in the honeypot, and they learnt to sit off the contest a little bit more. So probably had 2 or 3 less players go into the contest and learnt a little bit more balance. The Cats were just intercept defenders, probably the most balanced team that we've seen in a decade or so. They were just amazing. And the Pies, I think there's a bit of Richmond in that, but they were just more experienced in scenarios. Great leadership, great on-field leadership, a connection. So when game style was really strong, but Billy Frampton came in for a reason. You need a big player down the line to kick to when you can't move the ball off the line as much as you wish to. But I suppose, what does that bring us to as a synopsis? So, and Chris Scott said, we need to move with the game. We need to move with the game, and if you don't, you're going to be left behind. I think modern football, you need to make defences accountable. If you leave them to get an extra and intercept mark, you're going to be left behind. So forwards are going to hold more. You're going to try and get more even-numbered contests in front of the ball, and you're going to be prepared to move the ball into those even-numbered contests more often. You've still got to be great in the contest. That's a basic. You need defenders who are strong aerially, and not only now do they need to be strong aerially in their own, like with a +1, but they need to be strong aerially in even-numbered contests, and they need to be able to win their own ball on the ground. So you need to encourage that. And one thing that's always been true is you need to do the basics better than the opposition. More people win their position more often and do the basics better than your opposition, you're going to win a lot of games of footy. So that's the way I see it. I don't think it's changed that much. The basics of footy doesn't change that much, but the nuances might only be 5 or 10%, but they're huge.
So when you come to make your assessments at the end of the year, say Port Adelaide, Brisbane, who were super close, Port Adelaide, who would have finished frustrated, but
yes.
Ken Hinkley says that they're in the business of marginal gains.
Yep.
How much of it is making the adjustments? How much change do you make within what you think has the core of success, but is not quite there yet?
Well, it comes back to the coach's philosophy, in my mind. Are you a strengths-based coach that wants to make your weapons even stronger? And because there's available evidence here, like against the competition, we are really weak here, but we're really strong here. But if you're really weak in an area that is, in your mind, insignificant to playing winning football, then that's irrelevant. Like you might, there was a period there where Geelong really didn't care if they won stoppage or not, because they played with an extra behind the ball and they actually rebounded. Well, Richmond were very similar. They didn't care about their midfield. They didn't have a strong midfield, and they didn't care if they lost clearances, because they just rebound the ball off their +1 defence, and it was pretty hard to stop them doing that because they were the best in the competition at it. So if you're 18th in clearances, it's probably not going to worry you. So you're not going to work at being better at clearances because you own the transition game. So I think philosophically, most coaches will go, now, look, we're really great at this and we think this is impossible for the opposition to best, so we're just going to be so good at what we do here that the rest of it's going to be buffered. But there might be some different areas for respective teams that they think, no, we really need to focus on this here. Now, maybe Richmond decided we need to get Hopper and Taranto, we need to be better inside. We can't afford to continue down the path we're going because the game's changing. You don't want to be playing off your heels all the time. Now, Damien Hardwick's not there anymore, but it'd be interesting to see what Yze does with that.
Yeah. And what's the tension piece between moving your game toward what you think the standard is, what the game looks like, or moving the game towards
Yep.
you and being bold enough to try to do that.
I think Ross Lyon's and St Kilda are going to be a fascinating case study in that regard, because we see Ross as a dour defensive coach, and he will, philosophically, I can't see him changing that. He will always want to build his team defence, and St Kilda struggled with their team defence. They had players behind the ball that probably didn't communicate as well. I thought Howard probably wasn't quite as strong and struggled in that area, and I thought he was exposed at times. But Zach Dawson way back when, there was something about him that Ross loved, that he was able to, and it was probably his closing speed to be able to, when the front line of defence and the mid line of defence had failed, Zach Dawson had a way of getting across and just getting a fist in to be able to reset. So I think Ross is still working on his key backs and how they are going to communicate to the guys in front of them to set up the way they want to defend. And they still had some work to do there, and you don't change that in one pre-season. But they have when I look at Henry, Wanganeen, Miller, Hill, Sinclair, they could be the most dynamic team off the back. And he has spoken about that, about wanting to move the ball fast and wanting to challenge opposition defences. So St Kilda are going to be an interesting study between the philosophy of the coach and the way the game's going. Ross is going to need to potentially, he's going to work out, am I going to hold my forwards forward more? Because traditionally he's been empty out the forward line and get all the way back to support our defence in our back half. But to expect your forwards to do that and then get all the way forward and even up their numbers when they get in the forward line, it's nearly impossible to do. Something's got to give, and he's got to work out exactly what that balance is. And I don't think round one will be when we see that solution.
Yep.
It evolves for every team along the journey, because the seasons are as long as they've ever been.
The scourge of injury in the pre-season has wickedly hit Hawthorn.
It has, and I was down there on last Thursday to watch it, and Sam actually came across and sat with a crew of us there for a little bit. And he said, he goes, if I had a top five people that I wanted to get through unscathed, we lost two of them in Jath and Blank. So it is challenging, and it's not great for a developing team, because you need momentum. Like, the players need momentum. They've done a lot of work, like in pre-seasons leading into this and through this pre-season. If you've really invested, and then little things like this happen, it especially the key players, it sort of takes a little bit of a nick out of you as you go along. Now, you need to build that resilience and wherewithal, because the best teams go along these journeys and collect them, and then they callous and then they get better. But in the short term, it just becomes another hurdle that they need to overcome. And sometimes you need clearer air or smoother waters to be able to take the steps that you'd like to take. But that's life. That's the game.
Yeah, and it feels like there's a club that does get hit hard on the way into a season each year, and Hawthorn are saddled with that in the final few weeks.
Their challenge is to accept it, understand it, and even with the commentary that'll happen around it, you don't want to become hangdog about it, because it doesn't help you. So this is opportunity. So now Ethan Phillips comes in and played a great pracky match, actually stood out in that practice match, playing on Mitch Lewis. Did really well. Like, Mitch Lewis was nowhere to be seen in the best forward line, because Ethan Phillips does a job on him. So takes some intercept marks, been overlooked by 18 clubs 3 years in a row, so overlooked 54 times. Like, he's ready to go now, and he's hungry. We heard in the interview this morning, he's ready to go.
Opportunity. It was such a great insight into how you come in and make a club your own. So you know what that theaterette looked like, Bucks.
Yeah,
You've said in it before.
Interviewed Dion Prestia in it. At the beginning, it would have been 5 or 6 games into last year, and it's the theaterette. It's where they meet. It's where they talk about their game reviews, game previews. It's the inner sanctum of the inner sanctum. And there's photos of their successes up there in their eras, 17, 19, 20, and there's a balance of celebrating and reminding yourself about what you've achieved, the work that's gone into it, and how that feeds into your opportunities going forward, and letting that go, cutting the cord, and realising that it's time to not start again, but we're now cleaning the slate, as you know, put a new coat of paint on, as Yze reckons, and go again. But I mean, you look at Richmond's list, like even just go through, like say Nick Voston, Dylan Grimes, Dion Prestia, Dustin Martin. Now, it's a pretty good start if you're reading down number order. Liam Baker, love him. Like, just love the way he goes about it. You know, Taranto's, been there for a short time. Jaden Short, best and fairest winner. Daniel Rioli. Lynch, how's he going to go? I mean, there's no shortage of talented players at Richmond. So it's, as he said, talk to the leaders, make the adjustments. There needs to be a mind shift. We'll find out how invested they were, how much was left in their tanks in preparation in the early stages of the season. I don't think a pracky game is enough to go on, but they looked good. They would have been happy with that. And as David Teague said yesterday, the energy of the players, the connectedness of the players, and the attitude was the most encouraging thing about it. Well, they'll be tested at different times, and we'll find out whether they step up or whether they fall away. When he said when he said we had it on Wednesday, was that soon after the? Yeah. So that was like in the week or two after.
The week after.
The week after,
yep.
Yeah. I look at Fags, and I get two feelings about that. One is I love it. I love the positivity, owning it, fronting up to it, having those honest conversations, exposing the players to the reality of what has just happened, and it's really close to that disappointment is still ever present. Like it lingers, it lasts. It's not going to be gone now, but and then to be talking about the big picture, and we've learnt from this, like that's a really positive way to spin a disappointment. And really, they only lost it in the last 5 minutes, as suggested. The other part of me goes, well, what is going to make that? It's not just incremental improvement. Is it what is going to be the shift, the dog hungry attitude that is going to go from where they were to where they want to be? And that might not be incremental growth, and it might not be, taking the steps and learning the lessons, because you don't always get what you want going down that path. But so there's two ways to look at it. Is it, okay, that's the big picture. Like, we're always going to learn something from this. The other one is, hey, in that moment, we need more from you there. So it's philosophically very different, but Fags has always been that way. He has to be true to himself. And he's been able to develop this Brisbane list to where they are now, and they have improved their finals performances in the last 2 years. They hadn't won a final forever, and then they win one when they've played poor football going into the finals in 22, and then they perform really well through 23 to the point of being up with 5 minutes on the clock. So once again, we'll see how the players respond. But they're stacked. Brisbane's list is stacked, but that doesn't guarantee anything. You've still got to go and do the work and get it done.
I love the imagery of, so he knows the answers, and then he wants to hear from his group whether they're exactly on the same page, and whether the players are prepared to own it and purge their souls in front of it. So that's a really that's such a reassuring image of a group and its coach.
I agree, and it's very, very Chris Fagan. He's and potentially you don't have that perspective unless you've got that perspective. Like, he's lived it. He's lived it all. Lost grand finals, won grand finals. Trying to back up after a win, trying to recover after a loss. Like, he lived through 2012 loss to Sydney, playing Sydney the next year and winning. So as an assistant coach or as a head of footy. So with Alistair Clarkson. So he's lived all of this. He's been through it all. He's got the wherewithal. He's got the experience. He's the perfect bloke to guide Brisbane through these stages. And I think that they definitely did grow and learn about themselves over the last, the 14 months from August 2022 through to the final siren of 2023 Granny. They've improved and they've bettered themselves. What can they take into 24?
Yep. It's such an interesting time of year. Everything's theory, but then you get these little morsels at the moment.
Well, in the end, you can say, like, every coach is going to be positive about their club. their playing list and their ability and what they're capable of. Like every coach will be really positive and optimistic about what the season looks like. Get to round one, there'll be 9 that have had a win or whatever. Round 0 and round 1. I'm a little bit confused by that
at the start.
But there will be clubs that get a win on their first game and clubs that lose in their first game. It's not the end of the world, but the grit and the drive underneath and the work that either has or hasn't been done at that top level, that will become apparent as we go.